From a simple Bavarian teenager to a cramped room where everything ended with a silent poison and a gunshot, everyone knows who Hitler is. The dictator, the leader, the butcher, but very few people know the story of the woman who shared his final moments, a naive young girl who met him at 17 and fell in love with him. She remained in the shadows for years, voiceless, with no prominent role, no recognition, until the day came when Hitler witnessed the collapse of his kingdom, and the girl decided not to abandon him and to die with him. Who is Eva Braun, the one known as the Bride of the Devil? And why did she choose, after everything had ended, to end her life in a dark cellar beneath the ruins of Berlin, beside the most controversial man in history? This is not just a love story, but a strange, complex tale of isolation, indifference, moral grayness, and many puzzling questions. Let us explore it together. In the heart of the Bavarian Alps, near the town of Berchtesgaden, lies the Berghof, that mountain home which formed a safe bubble for Hitler's mistress, Eva Braun. There, amidst the serene nature, private recordings show Eva gathering flowers with her sister in a scene that reflects a peaceful life that in no way resembles the noise of politics and war. The Berghof was, for her, like a fantasy world, where she lived like a carefree nymph, as some described her, far from the horrors of reality and the eyes of the German people. It was also the secret refuge of Adolf Hitler, the leader who ruled with an iron fist. There, away from camera lenses and official processions, Hitler spent his private moments in the company of Eva, the girl he loved and kept hidden from the world. Despite the years of their relationship, Eva Braun's name is rarely mentioned in history books, and her face seldom appears in official documents. She lived in complete isolation within Hitler's life, with no declared role, nor any significant political presence. But she was there, sharing his daily life, listening to him, seeing him, loving him, and accompanying him in his most private moments. And although Hitler's official images always portray him as alone, representing the image of the strong leader, the detached commander, the symbol with no family and no emotions to weaken him, the truth was entirely different in the background. There was always one person in the shadows who shared his life. Eva. Who was this girl who remained hidden from the public for all those years? How did she meet Hitler? And why did their relationship remain secret despite its depth and longevity? Was she truly an innocent lover, a naive girl unaware of what was happening around her? Or was she a silent partner, aware of what was going on, yet choosing silence and to remain in the shadows? Come with me on this historical journey, where we won't just recount the story of Hitler's mistress, but delve into a hidden life, full of contradictions, ironies, and questions that have not been asked enough. When the name Adolf Hitler is mentioned, what immediately comes to mind is the symbol of absolute evil, the man who etched his name into the memory of humanity. As the Nazi leader who ignited a world war that claimed the lives of millions and established an empire built on fear, racism, and death. But behind this image, drawn in history books and official documents, there was another, lesser-known face, a man whose past bore completely different features. Hitler was originally a failed painter, expelled from the Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna, and his childhood was described as harsh. He suffered repeated humiliation from his authoritarian father. As he grew older, he endured a period of hunger and homelessness in the streets of the Austrian capital, with no money and no clear future. And although he later transformed into a symbol of tyranny, there was a personal side to his life that revealed a striking contradiction. He was a lover of classical music, unable to sleep without the melodies of Wagner, and he never began his morning without a cup of coffee and a piece of cake. He was a strict vegetarian, rejected violence against animals, and spent long hours walking alone in the gardens. These traits, simple as they may be, reflect a more delicate and complex inner side than what appears in the image of the stern leader. All of this presents us with a truly complex character, a strange mix of gentleness and savagery, of isolation and power, of obsessive ambition, and deep inner emptiness. So, can a butcher truly carry within him a human side? Here begins the mystery. Did Eva Braun, who lived within the closest circles of his life, see that other face he hid from the world? Did she see in him the man who loved music and walked among the trees and not the leader who signed execution orders and spoke of racial superiority? Or did she see him as he was in his entirety, but chose to focus only on the face she loved? Was her love for him an innocent emotion in which she believed him to be as he wanted to be seen? Or was she, in some way, a partner in a personal illusion, building a bubble for herself within a mad storm and refusing to look outside it? And was Eva, as some view her, merely a naive young woman, oblivious to what was happening around her? Or did she choose, consciously or unconsciously, to close her eyes, to ignore the monster under whose roof she lived, in exchange for love, or closeness, or security? In fact, could it be said that she, without being formally imprisoned, was a silent prisoner, a prisoner to her limited status, to her image as an unacknowledged companion, to the many years she spent in waiting, in shadows, and in silence? Those who knew her said she seemed happy, cheerful, emotionally attached to Hitler in a nearly childlike way. But it was not a balanced love. She was physically close, yet emotionally distant from the circle of decision-making and the real political scene. So, was she living an illusion, or did she know the truth fully and accept playing the role of the obedient spectator? All these questions will remain part of Eva Braun's historical dilemma, the dilemma of a woman who loved a man extraordinary in every way, even in his evil. So let us now get closer to Eva, to learn about her past and what kind of person she truly was. Eva Anna Paula Braun was born on the 6th of February 1912 in the German city of Munich and was raised in a middle-class bourgeois family. Her father, Fritz Braun, worked as a teacher at a vocational business school, while her mother, Franziska Kronberger, came from a traditional Bavarian family. Eva was not the only child. She grew up alongside her two sisters, Ilse and Gretel, in a conservative and stable household, governed by strict social expectations of what the ideal German girl should be. Despite this apparent stability, family life was not without turmoil. In the 1920s, a marital crisis shook the household, casting an atmosphere of tension and unrest over Eva's childhood. She received her education in Catholic schools, and at the age of 16 was sent to a boarding convent to receive further instruction in literature, morals, and domestic management. However, this experience did not last long. She returned after only a year to enter the workforce, driven by a clear desire to achieve financial independence, something rare among women of her generation at that time. Eva was not an outstanding student, nor did she possess notable academic ambition, but she displayed a clear interest in fashion, photography, and sports, interests that would accompany her throughout her life. In fact, she began her professional career in 1929 when she joined the renowned photography studio owned by Heinrich Hoffmann, the official photographer of the Nazi Party. Her initial duties were simple: arranging equipment, assisting clients, and occasionally posing in front of the camera for advertising or test shots. Although her position was marginal, her daily presence at the heart of the Nazi propaganda machine gradually brought her closer to the world of politics, even if she showed no real interest in it. She was not a member of the Nazi Party and did not participate in any direct political activity, but she was always on the margins of a world dominated by men, observing it silently without aspiring to enter it. And everything changed one autumn evening in 1929, when Eva Braun was 17 years old. On that day, Adolf Hitler entered Heinrich Hoffmann's photography studio in Munich to attend a routine photo session for promotional pictures to be used in Nazi Party publications. The occasion was ordinary, suggesting nothing of particular importance, but that fleeting moment became the beginning of a complex story that would span 16 years. There, for the first time, Eva Braun met Adolf Hitler. She did not know exactly who he was, as he introduced himself under a pseudonym, Herr Wolf, and despite the large age gap, he was 40 years old, she found in him a charming and impressive figure, with his calm demeanor and piercing gaze. Over time, the relationship between Eva Braun and Adolf Hitler gradually developed, despite the secrecy that surrounded it from the beginning. It was not an equal relationship, neither in terms of age nor influence, but it was built on a mix of personal fascination and emotional loyalty. Eva's family was not pleased with this relationship, which was never publicly acknowledged. They considered it illegitimate and a source of shame that threatened the family's reputation. Despite this familial disapproval, Eva did not back down. In fact, she showed an unexpected determination to persist. On more than one occasion, she expressed to Hitler her willingness to sacrifice everything for him, even her life, if necessary. Thus, a relationship was born between them marked by absolute loyalty and deep emotional attachment, a relationship that remained secret, yet formed a fundamental part of Hitler's private life, a life the world knew almost nothing about. On the family level, Eva's relationship with her parents was not ideal. Her father, Friedrich Braun, initially rejected the relationship, viewing it as unofficial and illegitimate. However, over time, he resigned himself to the reality, especially after the Braun family itself became part of Hitler's inner circle. In 1938, Eva moved into a house in the upscale Bogenhausen district, purchased for her by Hitler's personal photographer, Heinrich Hoffmann, on Hitler's orders. She became the official owner of that home. Despite her father's later claims of opposition to Nazism, the family clearly benefited from Eva's position and proximity to the Nazi leader. These contradictions reveal the complexity of family dynamics under the Nazi regime, where personal stances intertwined with interests and moral objections were entangled with practical privileges. The relationship lasted for more than 15 years, and yet the German public did not officially know of Eva Braun's existence until the final days of the war. Throughout those years, Eva lived in the shadows, in every sense of the word. She never appeared with him in any public event, was never mentioned in official press, and was not allowed to accompany him to political meetings or formal occasions. She was an invisible figure in the public sphere, even though she spent most of her time at his private residence. According to contemporary testimonies, Eva's personality was simple, perhaps even superficial. She was not interested in reading or public and intellectual issues, but she was known for her warmth, her sense of humor, and her constant smile. She loved a comfortable life, elegant fashion, skiing trips, and photography. It's said that she was among the first women in Germany to own a personal film camera, which she later used to document daily life at Hitler's mountain retreat, the Berghof. From the perspective of many, Eva's lack of political ambition may have been what made her acceptable within Hitler's close inner circle, a circle that was extremely cautious and suspicious of women with ambitions or a desire to influence. Still, one cannot underestimate her social intelligence. She knew how to maintain her place in the life of a complex man, constantly under scrutiny, without threatening his public image or provoking his displeasure. Hitler's private secretary, Traudl Junge, described her as light-hearted but always out of the spotlight. She never interrupted Hitler when he spoke and never asked him questions about affairs of state, but she was fully aware of when to speak and when to remain silent. This careful balance between presence and absence, between silent obedience and quiet persistence, was her method of survival in a world that was not welcoming to the prolonged presence of women. The presence of women in Hitler's life was limited and closely monitored, and Eva Braun was the only exception allowed to remain, not because she was politically significant, but because she posed no threat to his image. The Nazis wanted to present Hitler as a leader wholly devoted to the German nation, unbothered by women or romantic life. For this reason, it was not permitted for Eva to appear alongside him at public gatherings or even in family photos. This intentional absence from the media scene was part of a deliberate strategy to reinforce the image of the pure, emotionally detached leader, wholly dedicated to the Reich. But at the Berghof, behind the walls, Eva was always there, sometimes preparing coffee, listening in silence, laughing at jokes, and watching from afar a man she did not share in decision-making, but to whom she bore witness in all things. She lived a double life, present yet absent, that lasted until the final months of the war. Yet, deep inside, she knew she was not just a passing presence. She knew that between her and Hitler, despite all the limitations, there was a bond that could not be undone, even if the world never officially recognized it. And in April 1945, as Berlin began to burn under Soviet bombardment, she didn't flee like the others. Instead, she made a silent but final decision to follow him to the end. The main residence of Adolf Hitler was located in the Bavarian Alps, in a house known as the Berghof, near the town of Berchtesgaden. There, Eva Braun lived almost permanently, in her own private suite, surrounded by breathtaking natural scenery and complete political silence. For Hitler, the Berghof represented a parallel world, isolated from the noise of war and the tumult of fateful decisions. And within it, Eva became the closest thing to an unofficial wife, inside a closed palace. Eva's daily life at the Berghof was marked by routine and simplicity and included walking in nature, preparing photo albums, photographing visitors, participating in small tea parties, and hosting close guests. She practiced her passion for photography intensively, documenting hundreds of photos and short films of daily life in the residence. These materials later became an important part of the visual archive that helped in understanding the informal environment surrounding Hitler, and are now known as Eva Braun's home movies. These clips show the Nazi leader in moments far removed from politics, playing with dogs, walking in the snow, exchanging jokes with guests, while Eva is always seen at a distance, holding the camera or smiling in silence. Despite the outward appearance of comfort and calm in her life, it was not devoid of a sense of isolation. Eva was not allowed to participate in the men's discussions and had no say in matters that exceeded the boundaries of domestic entertainment. According to the memoirs of Albert Speer, the Minister of Armaments and one of Hitler's close friends, she was treated as if she were a piece of elegant furniture, summoned when Hitler wished to relax and dismissed when it was time for politics or decision-making. For her part, Eva did not try to break this barrier. She never showed political ambition or a desire to influence the decision-making circle. Rather, she seemed to understand the limits of her role and accepted it, whether out of awareness or resignation. No public stances were recorded for her on major issues in Germany, and she left behind no letters or diaries expressing her views on the Jews, the war, or even on Nazism itself. This ambiguity, this gray area she occupied, makes understanding her personality a true challenge. She was not an active partner in the regime, but she was not entirely a silent victim either. Although she did not participate in the making of political decisions, Eva was not unaware of what was happening. She knew of the massacres, the persecutions, and what was taking place on the front lines. Nevertheless, she chose to remain within the safe bubble that Hitler had provided for her, a bubble she never tried to escape, but rather accepted to live in, willingly or resignedly. Berghof formed the center of Eva's private life with Hitler. There, she played the role of the unofficial lady of the house, hosting Hitler's close friends such as Albert Speer, Joachim von Ribbentrop, and others. The film recordings made by Eva and her sister Gretel show scenes of daily life, such as swimming in Lake Starnberg, family trips, and color photography sessions. Eva was passionate about photography and filmmaking, especially after 16mm color film became available in 1937, which she used extensively. Yet, behind this cheerful image, her life was filled with contradictions. Berghof was also a social hub for the Nazi elite. Notable guests like Speer, Martin Bormann, and Joachim von Ribbentrop regularly visited the place where political discussions were held and important decisions made. However, these conversations were often superficial, avoiding heavy topics such as the Jews or concentration camps. Eva avoided interfering in these discussions, but she was present in them, playing the role of the perfect hostess. In this, the deep contradiction between the idyllic life portrayed at the Berghof and the brutal reality of the Nazi regime outside became evident. It was also at this location that critical political and military decisions were made. There, Hitler planned his campaign against Poland and discussed the details of war and repression with his aides, including Himmler and Ribbentrop. Eva was present during some of these moments, documenting the events with her lens, as she did during the visit of Italian Foreign Minister Galeazzo Ciano, or the signing of the Non-Aggression Pact with the Soviet Union. Her comments sometimes revealed her sense of marginalization, as in her remark on one photo, "There is something forbidden there, me." From the very first moment, the relationship between Eva Braun and Adolf Hitler was governed by secrecy. This concealment was not merely a personal decision or a matter of emotion, but part of a carefully crafted propaganda strategy. Hitler wanted to appear before the German people as a leader wholly devoted to the Third Reich, a man who had pledged himself to the nation, undistracted by any personal attachments or feelings. The public presence of a woman in his life would have threatened this ideal image. Therefore, Eva was excluded from the public sphere and forbidden from appearing in any official setting. Eva had no public presence. She did not accompany him before the cameras, nor did she appear by his side on political trips or at official events. Her name was not mentioned in speeches or newspapers. Even the inner circle of the Nazi regime dealt with her with reservation, as though her existence should not be acknowledged. She was brought into places through back doors and was forbidden from appearing when guests of political stature were present. On paper, she did not exist. This blackout was not only about controlling her image or keeping her away from the spotlight, but about protecting Hitler's image itself. The regime presented the leader as the spiritual father of the nation, or, as some described him, the husband of Germany. Any indication of a woman in his life would have contradicted this symbolic role. Thus, a wall of secrecy was imposed on the relationship, a wall Eva could never overcome, despite her deep closeness to him. Despite this total concealment, Eva was not without feeling or reaction. There were moments of distress and rejection, some of which appeared in letters she left behind, and others that manifested in two failed suicide attempts in the 1930s, the first by shooting herself, and the second by taking an overdose of sleeping pills. These attempts, as some have interpreted, were a desperate effort to prove her loyalty to him, and a sign of her sense of isolation and betrayal within this imbalanced relationship. Yet, Eva did not leave. Perhaps over time, she surrendered to the idea that this relationship would always remain in the shadows, and that the price she had to pay to stay close to Hitler was the near erasure of her identity. Despite her ambiguous position, she was not without agency. She had no political ambition and lacked the intellectual background to engage with the leaders or intellectuals of the regime, but she sought to preserve her place in Hitler's orbit by her own means. She was never invited to take part in decision-making and had no role in shaping the regime's policies, but she was close enough to hear, understand, and observe. No opposing stances were recorded of her, not even visible resentment, which led some historians to consider her silence a form of indirect responsibility. Others see her simply as a woman caught in the orbit of a man exceptional in his power, who chose to stay despite all the absence and self-erasure it cost her. Eva was not only the silent mistress, but also part of the Nazi propaganda machine, even if she remained behind the curtain. She worked with the official photographer Heinrich Hoffmann to produce photos and films that portrayed Hitler in a humanizing light, as a loving family man, far removed from his harsh dictatorial image. These images were used to highlight ordinary aspects of his life. Although they were not published during Hitler's lifetime, they survived the war to reveal a hidden side of the relationship. Eva produced documentary films like Punktchen am Berg, intended to entertain Hitler's inner circle, yet they also contributed to presenting an idealized image of his private life. She also sold some of her photos for substantial sums. One photo reportedly fetched 20,000 Reichsmarks. This aspect of her activity reflects her awareness of her role in that system, and her use of her position to maintain her presence in Hitler's life, away from potential rivals. Though she was portrayed, especially after the war, as a naive blonde, Eva was tougher and more intelligent than she appeared. Her 1935 diaries reveal a deep awareness of her status and a depression that was not merely a reflection of an unbalanced love, but also of an imposed reality she could not change. And in the end, when everything collapsed, she did not run away. She chose to follow the image she had lived in the shadow of for years. She followed Hitler down to the bunker, to remain in the shadows until death. She was neither a full partner nor a complete victim. She always stood on the edge, in a place that granted her no recognition, yet didn't spare her from consequences. And between the two, she built her existence, silent, limited, yet enduring until the very end. In the summer of 1939, just a few weeks before the outbreak of the deadliest war in history, Eva Braun decided to take a short break from her life, confined in shadows and isolation. Accompanied by her sister Gretel and their mother Franziska, she boarded the cruise ship Milwaukee, one of the vessels operated by the Strength Through Joy, Kraft durch Freude organization, a Nazi initiative aimed at organizing recreational activities for German citizens to boost morale and instill loyalty to the party. It was not an ordinary sea voyage, but one drenched in luxury and elegance, carrying with it a temporary separation from the turbulent reality beyond Europe's waters. On board the ship, Eva displayed her elegance in tailored suits from well-known Berlin tailors, sat for long hours beside the swimming pool, attended musical parties and social events, and documented most moments of the journey through her camera lens, a passion that accompanied her throughout her life. The photos she captured during the trip showed laughing women, the sun rising over breathtaking Norwegian fjords, and happiness that bore no reflection of the looming tragedies behind the political scenes. What makes this journey noteworthy is not only its rosy details, but the context in which it occurred. At the very moment when Eva was enjoying the cold northern waters and living moments of personal luxury, Adolf Hitler, in the Berghof, his mountain residence in Bavaria, was holding intense meetings with his military leaders and advisors, finalizing his plan to invade Poland and preparing to unleash the gates of hell upon Europe. This stark contrast between the artificial calm in Eva's life and the global political turmoil precisely encapsulates the role she played in Hitler's life, the private shadow unseen by anyone, the emotional companion who neither objected nor was questioned, yet knew. Eva was not isolated from politics despite her apparent seclusion. She was aware, to varying degrees, of what was happening. The photos she took during the trip do not merely reflect naivety or indifference. Rather, they suggest a conscious or unconscious attempt to hold on to the moment, to escape from the impending future she deeply sensed. Indeed, it wasn't long before reality struck. Shortly after her return, on September 1st, 1939, Hitler declared war on Poland, announcing, "From now on, my life no longer belongs to me, but to my people." With this statement, the world officially plunged into the inferno of World War II. And in the moment Eva heard the news, she broke down in tears, according to her sister Ilse, later recounting with worry, "This means war. He'll leave. And what will happen to me?" Her concern was not political or humanitarian in the traditional sense, but existential, born from the fear of losing her fragile place in the world of a man who left no personal ties behind when he moved. Eva, who had spent years trying to cement her existence in Hitler's life, even though he never granted her official recognition, felt in that moment that everything might collapse. But, as in previous times, she expressed her absolute loyalty to him. She said she would die if anything happened to him. These were not mere emotional words, but a reflection of the philosophy that governed her life during that period, that her existence was entirely bound to him, and that her fate was intertwined with his. From her position in the Berghof, she ordered supplies to be stocked, preparing for an unknown period to come. This act was not merely a practical measure, but a symbol of her growing understanding that her role would not be a romantic journey during the years of war, but a long wait in the shadows, under the impact of political bombs and bloodshed, in a life where she no longer held any guarantees. The beginning of the war marked a turning point in Eva's life. Life was no longer merely about residing beside an isolated leader in a mountain palace. Her days became filled with anticipation, anxiety, and a recurring feeling of exclusion. Hitler, who had never granted her a formal status, now became even more distant and preoccupied. With each battle, and with every declaration of victory or defeat, Eva took yet another step backward, sinking deeper into a life of waiting and silence. But contrary to the stereotypical image of a naive woman living in illusion, Eva was aware of what was happening. She was recording, observing, and knowing. And even if she didn't participate in decisions, her proximity to the center of power granted her a rare view of what was not publicly declared. During that period, her visual documentation journey took on a different tone, as her recordings, photos, and films began to capture rare moments from the lives of the Nazi elite during the war, without anyone realizing then that this material would one day become a historical treasure, revealing the hidden side of Hitler's life. The summer journey of 1939, then, was not just a recreational escape in the arms of nature, but the final chapter of life before the war. It was the last dance before the storm, the moment when some thought life could go on as it was, even as the world was heading toward hell. As for Eva, she returned from that trip knowing that the time she would live from now on would be different, a time without travels, without light, and without hope, except in the continued life of the Führer. In the spring of 1945, Berlin was under siege, not from one side, but from all directions. Soviet armies were advancing heavily toward the German capital, and cannons bombarded the edges of the city without pause. The red tanks were drawing closer with each passing day, and the civilians were hiding under the rubble, while the Third Reich was collapsing at a speed that not even the most pessimistic of the Nazi leadership had expected. At this decisive moment in history, Germany was breathing its last, and Nazism was crumbling with all its might and propaganda images, revealing its deep fragility under the weight of reality. At the heart of this storm, beneath the Reich Chancellery Garden, Adolf Hitler was hiding in what later became known as the Führer bunker, a fortified underground shelter, initially built as a precautionary refuge, then transformed into the final center of Nazi power in its last days. There, far from windows, surrounded by concrete walls and artificial ventilation systems, Hitler sat among tattered maps and grim reports, watching his state collapse before his eyes. With him was Eva Braun, who had decided to be a witness, indeed, a partner, in this final chapter of the story. Despite the catastrophic conditions, Eva, in mid-April, defied the danger and arrived in besieged Berlin. She knew exactly what awaited her, and yet refused to leave Hitler or save herself. Her decision was not merely born of emotion, but came as a reaffirmation of her absolute loyalty to him, as if she wanted to affirm her identity at last, even if it were in the scene of the ending. Those close to the Nazi inner circle tried to dissuade her, advised her to flee, but she simply replied, "I prefer to die with him than live without him." Eva was not a politician, nor did she hold any leadership role. She did not master the arts of war or the art of speech, and her name did not appear in military reports or strategic plans. But her presence there, amidst generals, maps, and rejected surrender decisions, was a clear message that she chose this fate of her own will. She was not a blind victim, but a woman fully aware of the outcome of the story she was living. In the final days inside the bunker, Hitler was in a state of physical and psychological collapse. His features had changed, his health had deteriorated, his nerves had broken down. He raged at his commanders, accused them of betrayal, blamed the German people for their failure, and poured his anger onto fate itself. He refused all advice to escape or negotiate. For him, dying within Berlin, amidst the ashes of his empire, was better than leaving the capital defeated. Amid this atmosphere saturated with defeat, he made one final unexpected decision: to marry Eva Braun on April the 29th, 1945. Their marriage was held inside the bunker, attended by a small number of close associates such as Joseph Goebbels and his wife Magda and Martin Bormann. There were no signs of celebration, no white dress, no music, no flowers. The ceremony lasted less than 20 minutes. It was a symbolic moment, granting Eva, after more than 14 years in the shadows, the title of legitimate wife, if only for a few short hours before the end she already knew. The following day, April 30th, the couple had their final lunch with those present. It was a silent, heavy meal, as if everyone knew that this was the last pause before death. After their farewells, Hitler and Eva withdrew to their private room. There were no screams or sounds of gunfire heard. When the guards entered later, they found the two bodies, Hitler dead from a shot to the head, and Eva beside him, having swallowed a cyanide capsule. She was only 36 years old. According to his prior orders, the guards poured gasoline on the bodies in the Chancellery Garden and set them on fire. The goal was not merely to dispose of the corpses, but to erase the image, the identity, and to avoid the scenario in which their remains would become a political relic or a symbol. With Soviet forces entering the site shortly after, long chapters of controversy began regarding what truly happened, the fate of the bodies, the truth of Hitler's death, and Eva's role in that fateful moment. But what is beyond dispute is that Eva Braun, who spent her life in the shadows, chose to declare her relationship with Hitler at the only moment when that relationship had lost all political value. She was not the leader's wife at the height of his glory, but his wife at the moment of complete collapse. Their marriage was not recorded in celebrations, but in the depths of the bunker, amidst the ruins, above the ashes of the Nazi dream. Her image after the war remained the subject of fierce debate. Was she a devoted woman who loved a man despite his brutality, or was she a passive figure who shared in silence, and thus deserved the same fate? Did she commit suicide out of love, or out of fear of facing the court of history? These questions remain open to this day, but in the end, she was not forced to stay. She chose to remain, just as she once chose to stand behind the camera, behind the curtain, behind a man who could only exist at the front. And on that final day, when the walls fell and the guns fell silent, even if only briefly, she didn't try to escape. Instead, she went to her fate by her own will, in a final scene that illuminated a moment of truth, that she was there, fully aware, until the very end. After her death, Eva Braun did not leave behind a political or intellectual legacy worth mentioning. and her name was not written in the pages of major decisions or global conflicts. Yet, despite that, she left behind an open question that still haunts historians and opens the door to moral and intellectual debate. Who was Eva Braun really? Was she merely a woman who fell in love with a man possessing a destructive charisma? Or was she a silent partner in one of the most murderous regimes in history, complicit through her silence, and perhaps her indifference, in the continuation of evil? On the surface, Eva Braun's life suggests a superficiality that almost exonerates her. She did not appear in the public arena, nor was she known for political opinions or ambitions for power. She was not an active member of the Nazi Party, and she never appeared at mass rallies or propaganda speeches. According to documents and testimonies, she was more concerned with daily life and comforts, with photography, fashion, cinema, travel, and personal appearance. Some close to her described her as simple and superficial, and keen to avoid deep discussions, as if she had deliberately chosen to remain on the margins of the picture. This side of her led some historians to view her as a victim of love or ignorance. Her lack of involvement in decision-making, or even discussion of it, is seen by some as evidence of her innocence in the crimes committed in the name of the Nazi regime. She did not carry a weapon, did not sign any orders of execution, and did not participate in high-level power meetings. From this perspective, Eva appeared as a soft feminine shadow in the life of a man who made storms. But the image becomes more complicated if we look from the other side, for although she did not participate directly, she was inside Hitler's inner circle, in palaces and headquarters, on private tours and personal trips, and lived with him in both his private and public moments. She witnessed his reactions, his mood swings, his rants against commanders, and his news from the front lines. It's true that she did not place the signature, but she heard and knew and saw. She was not isolated in a distant cabin, but at the heart of the storm, and yet she did not ask. Here lies the moral dilemma surrounding her character. Does silence exempt one from responsibility? In a context like that of Nazi Germany, where bodies piled up in camps and dissidents were hanged in public squares, can someone who lived in the very heart of the scene be exonerated simply because they did not participate with their own hands? The British historian Hugh Trevor Roper described her precisely, saying she was superficial but not naive, meaning she lacked depth in her understanding of events, but she was not oblivious to them either. As for the German historian Heike Gerdermacher, she offered a more analytical reading when she saw Eva's decision to stay with Hitler until the end as an internal adoption of the leader's image, even if only on a personal level. That is, although she was not openly a Nazi, she had absorbed his vision to a degree that drove her to die alongside him, not out of protest or retreat, but out of loyalty. Between these interpretations, Eva emerges as an exceptionally gray figure, unable to be placed within the realm of absolute evil, nor that of absolute innocence. She was not a party to the crimes, but she did not distance herself from those who committed them. She never declared official support, but she showed no question or rejection, even though all signs around her were screaming of what was happening. The painful irony is that Eva could have survived. No one would have pursued her as a Nazi leader. She could have left, started a new life after the war, told her story, or remained silent forever. But she chose not to. She chose to stay in the bunker, among the crumbling maps and smoke, until the moment of the end. And that choice, for many, was more expressive of her position than any public statement. Some researchers believe that Eva was not devoid of desire, but was searching for love and recognition. Perhaps she saw in her closeness to Hitler a way to grant her life meaning, identity, and value. But, without knowing, she turned into a symbol of complicit silence, of the observer who does not object, who becomes over time part of the machinery of evil without ever holding a weapon. And from here, Eva Braun's story transcends its individual limits to raise a broader moral question. Is it enough not to be directly involved to be innocent? Does willful ignorance, or turning a blind eye to the truth, exempt a person from responsibility? In a world governed by extremist ideologies, how many people stood on the margins, like Eva, and contributed to the continuation of catastrophe through their silence and submissiveness? Eva Braun remains one of the most perplexing figures in Hitler's circle. Neither clearly evil nor a pure victim, she cannot be listed among the criminals, but she was never known as a resistor either. She simply lived in the shadows and chose to die in the only moment she stepped into the light of love, or what she believed it to be. In a history soaked in blood, filled with loud speeches and misleading propaganda, Eva Braun emerges as a marginal figure, yet her presence raises many questions. A woman who lived in the shadows, on the edge of the storm center, without leaving behind a stance, an idea, or even a political trace worth mentioning. She had no speech she was known for, no role in decision making, just a shadow moving behind a man who swallowed the world and collapsed with it. Did she truly love Hitler? Perhaps. Was she a victim? Partially. But what is certain is that she was a silent witness. For many years, Eva chose to remain in the background, far from the spotlight, without opinion or position. And yet, when the end came, she decided to appear. In a striking paradox, the moment of her death, beside Hitler, was the only moment she stepped into the open, as if she wanted to finally write her name down, not as a decision maker, but as someone who chose to bind her entire fate to the fate of the leader, even in his moment of collapse. Eva Braun did not make history, but she chose to die in its decisive moment. Perhaps in doing so, she wanted to say something she could not express in her silent life, or perhaps simply she knew no other choice. But the question raised by her presence is not hers alone. Rather, it extends to touch all those who lived under totalitarian regimes without objection, without voice, without stance. Those who watched and did not speak. Those who inhaled the scent of death and passed by tragedy without opening a window or letting out a cry. Eva Braun's story, with all its ambiguity and silence, does not offer us a definitive answer, but it poses a painful question that will remain suspended as long as history repeats its cycles. In a time of moral collapse, is it enough not to be criminals? Or is silence too a hidden form of participation?